Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. We begin our today's session of the Islam Study Circle. The Quranic verse that we have selected today, in fact, comprises two very short surahs of the Quran. In fact, they are the last two surahs of the Quran. And the reason that they have been selected, of course, shall become evident as we discuss the meanings and explanation of this surah, of these two surahs. So the broad heading which has been given is seeking refuge with God. So, of course, all of us need the protection of the Almighty. All of us need the refuge of the Almighty from various evils, from various mischiefs which people create, which the shaitan creates, which, of course, is not just among the jinn, it is also found amongst people as well, human beings as well. So basically, these are the two surahs which the Almighty has instructed us to read to give ourselves into the protection and refuge of the Almighty. So let me start off by just narrating or reciting these surahs and the translation of the surahs. So the first of them is قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. It means pray. Of course, the command pray is for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, says, O Prophet Muhammad, pray. And of course, as a result, we have been instructed as well through him. Pray, I seek refuge with the Lord who breaks apart and brings forth everything from the evil of all that he has created, and from the evil of darkness when it overspreads, and from the evil of those who blow on knots, and from the evil of every envious person when he envies. The second of these surahs, which of course is the last surah of the Quran, is Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, min sharril waswasil khannas, allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, minal jinnati wan nas. Pray, I seek refuge with the Lord of mankind, the sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the prompter of vice, who withdraws after his prompting, who prompts evil suggestions in the hearts of people, and is from among the jinn and mankind. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a simple translation of these last two surahs of the Quran, which in fact are called the Mu'awwazat, which means as a group, the Mu'awwazatan, which as a group they are surahs which we recite in order to give ourselves in the custody, in the protection, in the refuge of the Almighty from all unseen evils. Of course, they do include evils which we can see as well, but especially things that don't come in our own knowledge, maybe, or they might not come in our own grasp, in on our senses, but people who are trying to be our ill-wishers or those who are trying to damage us in any way. So the first of these surahs starts off by saying, A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq. So everything, so the Lord of everything, which is brought forth by him, he breaks apart everything and then he brings it forth. For example, we know that vegetation sprouts from seeds. We know that a child is born from a mother's womb. So everything which is torn apart and then it appears. So it's like saying that the Lord who brings forth everything into inception, to give us this idea that we are seeking refuge with the Almighty, who is the creator of everything. He brings forth everything. So if there is any being with whom we can seek our refuge, is with the Lord, with the being who has in fact created everyone. And then it says, Min sharri ma khalaq, from the evil of all that he has created. Of course, it does not mean that the Almighty has created evil in itself per se. It refers to the various misuse of evil that people do, or misuse of good of their will which people adopt, and then because of this evil that they produce, since it is produced by the by the freedom which is given by the Almighty. The verse is actually attributing this to the fact that it is the evil that He has created. Of course, that He is not the direct creator of evil. He has given this the choice of the freedom of choice to a person, and it is by his misuse that evil comes into being. And therefore, we are advised to seek refuge with the Almighty. And then he says, and the surah says, وَمِن شَرِّ غَاسِقٍ إِذَا وَقَبَ, from the evil of darkness when it overspreads. We know that a lot of things happen in the dark, a lot of evil things, occult sciences, witchcraft, and things which are beyond our grasp, beyond our senses, do take their effect at night. This is a special part of the day in which evil and mischief is let loose. So this has been specially mentioned here. And then وَمِن شَرِّ النَّفَّاثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ, from the evil of those who blow on knots. Again, this is a way on which people used to adopt in yesteryears to do magic and to do witchcraft and other forms of occult sciences, which of course have been transmitted from various people to other people, and they actually blow on knots and other. They adopt similar phenomena in order to transmit whatever they are reading in order to create that effect that they would like to create. So, min sharri naffasati fil uqad, and then finally, wa min sharri hasidin iza hasad, from the evil of every envious person, every jealous person who is jealous of us. Of course, we are at times not aware of people who are jealous of us. We don't know, they are covert, but this verse actually pronounces this protection from us and gives us in the protection of the Almighty, that please protect us from the evils of people who envy. And as you can see, if you place these surahs in their context, the way they were found in the Quran, these are basically surahs which are directed towards the Prophet Muhammad SAW directly themselves, and they were given to him as two weapons to combat evil as he was migrating from Mecca into Medina. And the Almighty knew that here the onslaughts of Satan, the onslaught of jealous people, the onslaughts of people who would try to create this aura of witchcraft and magic would be rampant, and hence they would try their best to stall the progress of Islam. So this is the back door which people adopted in order to stall Islam, and they were not able to face it openly, and they were not able to stop its tide. This is how some sections of the society of the times of the Prophet reacted, by adopting witchcraft and magic and other things which, of course, relate to parapsychology as well, in order to subvert the advance of Islam. The second of these sources says, "A'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, min sharril waswasil khannas." This specifically relates to the evil which is worked up by Satan, and you can see there is an appeal, very effective appeal in the initial three verses when it says, "Rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas," which means the sovereign of mankind, the Lord of mankind, the God of mankind. It's like an appeal that we seek his refuge from the evil of the prompter of vice, of course, which refers to Satan. And as the verse ends, it says that that Satan is not just found amongst jinn, it's also found amongst humankind as well. So people who whisper evil prompts, they give these suggestions to us, these latent suggestions, and then after giving these suggestions, they just withdraw as if they have worked their mischief, they have created, or they have succeeded in their mission of creating mischief in the minds of other people, in creating evil thoughts in them, and then let them work with the thoughts that have been played upon them and lead them astray. But we know from the Quran itself that Satan and his accomplices do not have any effect on people who are pious, do not have any effect beyond the fact that they can whisper evil or suggest evil. They cannot forcibly take a person astray. This power has not been given to Satan, except when the Almighty says in the Quran that only Satan and his accomplices have this power only on those who make friends with Satan and his accomplices. So people who are enticed by Satan and his accomplices and they are led away ultimately, then only on these people does Satan and his accomplices have any power. Otherwise, the Quran says that people who are servants of God, who are pious, who remain attached to the Almighty, Satan has absolutely nothing to do with them, except, of course, he can just whisper evil suggestions or latent suggestions, but then they always have this prerogative and this power to wedge away these suggestions, to discard them. They do come to us, but then it is our own willpower which makes them go away. So these two surahs, my dear viewers, are something that all of us must remember or memorize by heart. And for things that are unknown, maybe things like magic or things like evil eye or things like illnesses about which we have no other doctoral, I would say, remedy. These are the ones from which we need the protection of the Almighty. Of course, this protection is needed from all sorts of ailments, but especially for ailments which we perhaps are not able to fully diagnose. And since we know that witchcraft, since we know that magic is something which has always existed and people have misused these occult disciplines, so therefore, our defense against these occult disciplines, our defense against witchcraft and magic and things of these sort are these two surahs of the Quran. And also, my dear viewers, besides these surahs, we do also have several supplications or du'as from the Prophet himself. And it would be good if you could look up some of these du'as which are found in many anthologies of supplications, which similarly, like these two surahs, give us in the refuge of the Almighty from ailments which we are not able to fully diagnose, and from ailments from which we need God's protection. And hence, these are the two surahs that we must keep on reciting as far as we can. Of course, while paying attention to what we are reciting, we should know what we are reciting. And these two surahs actually are a means of giving us this confidence that God is protecting us. And if anything is going to happen, the Quran says, وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. If anyone can harm us, it can only be because of God's permission. So if this protection is only broken if the Almighty Himself wants that thing to happen in order to test us, in order to try us. That's a completely different thing. But other than that, these are the protections that we have against unseen evils, especially. And they can only work if the Almighty allows them to work. And as I said, one of the reasons that He allows them to work is to try and test us through various calamities. So, my dear viewers, we now come to the next part of our segment. It's the first segment, and which is the hadith, a hadith that we're going to study. This hadith actually is taken from the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and I have labeled it as only good deeds count. So it says, Anas bin Malik يقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتبع الميت ثلاث فيرجع اثنان ويبقى واحد يتبعه أهله وماله وعمله فيرجع أهله وماله ويبقى عمله. So Anas ibn Malik reported that God's messenger stated, three things follow a deceased in his funeral procession. So when a person dies, he is taken to the graveyard to be buried. There are three things which go with him. And these are, and then the hadith further says that two of them return and one remains with them. His family, his wealth, and his deeds. These are the three things. So his family is going to, of course, go and consign him to the grave. His wealth, of course, he leaves behind his wealth. And then his deeds. So these are the three things which follow him. And then the hadith says the family and the wealth return. They do not go along with him. Once he goes to the grave, they do not go along with him. Only one thing goes along with him, and that is good deeds. Or, of course, the word deed here effectively means good deeds. So a person leaves behind or takes, well, what he takes with himself when he dies is just one thing, and that is the deeds that he has done, the pious, virtuous acts that he has done when he was in this world. That is all that is going to go with him. Everything that he amassed, his wealth, his riches, the affluence, the bungalows, the cars, the plots, the assets that he had gathered and collected and assembled, all will stay here. His family, his dependents, his accomplices. There's so many other factors on which we are dependent upon, and one of them is this human force. Of course, our parents, our siblings, our children, all of them, when we are living, they are a means of supreme comfort to us, and also they remain all along us. Similar is the case with the wealth that we have amassed. And the good deeds, of course, that we do are ones that we do in this world. So once we die, the Hadith tells us that all of this is left behind. Nothing goes with us except our deeds. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very timely reminder to all of us that if we have to face the Almighty, we must understand the fact that we have to face Him with what we are going to take with us. If we are taking with us evil deeds, our own fate will be severely compromised, and we could end up in the most evil of abodes. And if we are taking good deeds, or in other words, these good deeds outnumber the evil ones, we are going to end up in the Almighty's paradise. And this is something that we have to strive for. And as the Quran has said at another place, فَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, that this is something that we should compete for. We do compete for wealth, we do compete for fame, we do compete for so many other things. But the Almighty says that if there is anything that we should really compete for, then that is the good fate in the hereafter. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. So let these competitors compete for this end, for this goodly fate. And we need to understand that the virtuous deeds that we do here, they may be very small. At times, they are very small acts of kindness, maybe just a smile or lending a shoulder to a person who may be in some sort, in a spot of bother, or maybe watering a plant, maybe just giving refuge to a stray animal. It could be a very small act of kindness, anything. But let us remember that these small acts of kindness, they are the ones which are going to go with us. We must also remember that the money we are spending on other people, on charitable causes, in fact, that is the money which is going to remain with us. That is the money which will be ultimately of help to us. We must not think that the money we have given away has gone away forever. In fact, that is the money that's going to come to us, come back to us manifold. And the Almighty has actually said that if we lend to the Almighty for causes which are specifically for His religion, the cause of His religion, and He will give it back to us. And He has lovingly called it as Qarz Hasan. So, Manzallazi yuqrizullahu qarzan hasana. So, who is it that who is going to give Lord a goodly loan, which of course means that we are spending something for the cause of the Almighty, and He's going to return it to us manyfold. So, if we are to understand the basic philosophy of life, my dear viewers, it is the fact that we have to give preference to the life of the hereafter. The life of the hereafter is something which we do tend to forget, we do tend to lose sight of. But in fact, this is the real life. This is the life that we have to always keep ourselves tuned to. We have to understand that this world is a temporary world. It is going to finish one day. Our own lives may have a span of 60, 70, or 80 years, and then we are gone. And the only asset that we are taking with us is the asset of good deeds. The only provision that will be of any use to us is the provision of good deeds. And we maybe have this courage to always adhere to the truth, to speak the truth, to side by the truth, to help the weak, to be sympathetic to them, to be kind to them, to discharge the rights of the Almighty, to discharge the rights of our parents, of our siblings, of all those who come into contact with us. because this is what's going to benefit us in the hereafter. And if even if we lose our wealth or we lose some of the other things that we think they are very cherishable in this world, let us not be losers in the hereafter. Losing in this world is should be much more acceptable to us than being or ending up as losers in the hereafter. Ladies and gentlemen, now we'll go on to the third part of our first segment, and that is the Bible verse of the day. And this has been selected uh, from the Gospel of Luke, chapter number 18, and these are verses 9 to 14. And I have titled them as self Jesus on self-righteousness. What was his advice regarding self-righteousness? The words are, and he made this story for some people who were certain that they were good and had a low opinion of others. Two men went up to the temple for prayer, one a Pharisee and the other a tax farmer. The Pharisee, taking up his position, said to himself these words: God, I give you praise because I am not like other men who take more than their right, who are evildoers, who are untrue to their wives, or even like this tax farmer. Twice in the week I go out without food. I give a tenth of all I have. The tax farmer, on the other hand, keeping far away and not lifting up even his eyes to heaven, made signs of grief and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I say to you, this man went back to his house with God's approval and not the other. For everyone who makes himself high will be made low, and whoever makes himself low will be made high. So these are such moving, such beautiful words said by Jesus, and I think you can all clearly see after going through the various excerpts of Bible that we have been studying all along in these sessions, that such words can only be spoken by a prophet, of course, on behalf of the Almighty. The majesty, the sheer glory, the splendor they carry, it's out of this world. It's as if God Himself is speaking. And if you have made yourself tuned to the Quran and to how the Almighty speaks in the Quran, it comes so easily to you that these words must have been. Of course, this is a translation. We don't have the original. The original must be even more powerful, but we can see even the translation has such a resounding effect, such a potent effect when we read it, especially the last lines when Jesus said that this man went back to his house with God's approval. The person who was humble, the person who said that I don't even have the courage to lift up my eyes to and make signs of grief. And on the other hand, we had this person who was bragging about himself, who was the Pharisee, and he said that I am not the other person he was actually telling about the pious deeds that he would do. He was a person. He was not like a person who's untrue to his wife. He was a person who does not take more than what his right is. So everything good that he was actually explaining was ascribing it to himself by saying that I do all these things. And on the other hand, the tax farmer remained humble. He never claimed, never made these tall claims. And about him, Jesus said that there are many people who are low, but the Almighty makes them high. And there are many people who claim to be high, but the Almighty makes them low. So, on the one hand, these verses do prompt us, do caution us that we must not show arrogance. We must not be self-righteous. We must not show off our righteousness. And we have to be unassuming. We have to be humble. We need to realize that if we are doing something good, we are doing it for the Almighty. We are not doing it because we would like to show it to others. We should not be self-righteous by actually telling the other person that you are absolutely wrong and I am the person who is absolutely right. This is the attitude, of course, which is not only killing in terms of academic knowledge, but also in righteousness. When we think that we are the final word, when we think that we have the ultimate final knowledge about everything, or we have the wherewithal or the piety that other people don't possess, then this is absolutely something which the Almighty does not like. It is sheer arrogance, it is haughtiness, it is something which is very very unbecoming of a human being. A human being has to be humble. He has to be down to earth. He has to realize that he has done a lot of mistakes in his life, or she has done a lot of mistakes in her life, and if we keep an eye on our sins and the shortcomings that we have, it will keep us humble. And if we keep an eye on how other people have behaved and how highly they have performed, it will also inspire us in doing these good deeds. So, what we need to understand is that the Prophet Jesus here, through these two examples regarding two real life people, has said that never brag about yourself, and especially do not assert yourself in a manner that you actually discard the other person, you dismiss the other person, and you impose yourself as if you are the only person who is correct and the other person is absolutely right. This is against humility, and anything which is against humility has to be avoided by human beings. So, my dear viewers, we now come to the end of our first segment. And if we have any questions, please let me know so that I can open the mics. And then, inshallah, once we have gone through these questions, we'll take up the next part of our discussion. I do not see any raised hands. So I do have a written question by someone, uh, by Farah Naz, and she says that we do good deeds and we also do bad deeds, and then, of course, that we do repent at in certain times. So, when we repent, is it that we those bad deeds will still be reflected in our account of deeds? No, the Quran says that if your deeds have been forgiven by the Almighty, they shall be deleted from our account and they will no longer be present in our account. So, this is, of course, what actually is meant by repentance, that once a person has repented and he has been forgiven by the Almighty, then what will happen is that his deeds or her deeds shall, or her misdeeds, of course, will not appear in the account of or the register of deeds of that person. So, assume that there are no more questions. I don't see any hands which have been raised. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me now proceed to the second part of our study circle. And as is our convention, we generally take up commonly held misconception regarding Islam, all the basic tenets of Islam. And today, the misconception which I have chosen is a commonly understood, or I would say misunderstood fact, which is that it is generally thought that uh, the Quran has been revealed at various instances of time, of course, over a period of 22 or 23 years, and the circumstances which have occasioned the revelation of the Quran have been various. For example, we have the Meccan period in which various phases passed in the Prophet's life, and he was guided by the Almighty through Wahi, through divine revelation in these various phases of his Meccan life. And then when he migrated to Medina, of course, we find that there were other instances in his life, there were other incidents. We had wars, we had the Truce of Hudaybiyah, then we had the conquest of Mecca, and then, of course, we had this huge phenomena in which many tribes accepted Islam. And as the Quran itself says, يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. And in all these 23 years, the Quran was revealed in various installments, and then later it was gathered and compiled. And one of the problems which we face when we study the Quran is this notion that has arisen because of certain misunderstandings, that the Quran is a haphazard collection of verses. And this particular misconception has been given a very, I would say, strong impetus by our Oriental scholars, many Western scholars, who think that there is a certain amount of disconnectedness amongst the verses, and it seems as if there is a topic which has been raised, and then suddenly there is a jump and a leap, and we find that another topic is discussed, and then another topic, and then another topic, and there seems to be no connection between these topics. So this, of course, is something that we need to address, and I would like here to point out the fact that the work done by three premier scholars in this field need our attention so that we can really have that flair, that grasp of the Quran, that it is in fact a coherent book. It's a book revealed in a certain sequence. It has a context. And if there is a seemingly disjointed uh, section of the Quran, then we actually need to understand that this disjointedness is because the way we look at the context, the way we find the Quran itself, at times is not what the Almighty Himself has in His mind. So we need to understand that there is the context in which the Quran has been arranged has certain specific features. Although this perhaps this session is not the right one to go into details, but I would really recommend you that if you are able to read the Quranic exegesis of Imam Habibuddin Farahi, or his student Imam Amin Yasin Islahi, or his student who also happens to be my teacher Javed Ahmad Ghamidi. All three of these scholars have written commentaries on the Quran. You will appreciate the fact that this is not a disconnected or a disjointed book as it seems. One of the reasons for this disconnectedness is the rapid change between the speaker and the spoken to. It's a change between a person who is speaking and a change between the person or the group of people who are being addressed, and this occurs very rapidly. And it is as if as a teacher is speaking to three or four students whom he is facing in class. At one point of time, he's discussing the issues which is faced by the first student. Then he changes his posture and looks toward the second student, and then the third, and then shifts back and forth at times. So this change between the speaker and the spoken to, if we do not realize that it is happening, the way it does happen in a book of dialogues, for example, the dialogues of Plato, we know that in such a book, the speaker and the spoken to, they do change. But the only difference is that the speaker is always written in a book of dialogues on the left-hand corner so that we know that who is speaking to whom. But in the case of the Quran, this is not the case. We need to understand to the context of the words themselves that who is the speaker and whom is he speaking to. So if this is one of the reasons of the disjointedness that we find. There are other aspects as well, because it's not that simple, and maybe we can devote some time in some other session towards this coherence or this coherent nature of the Quran, how we find it to be coherent. But let me just give you one example which can perhaps make the point more clear that I'm making. And that is when we interpret a verse out of context and we think that there is a certain meaning to that verse, and we disregard what is behind it and what is after it, then we tend to take that verse out of context. And many a time we do end up in a very, very opposite understanding of that verse, which in fact the context is conveying. Uh, If you have the chance of reading the various siparas of the Quran, or even various Quranic, the whole collection of the Quran, you'll find a verse often written at the top. And just to make my point, that verse is La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun, which means only the pure touch this book. So this is just the book. This is just part of the. This is just the verse which is written on the Quran or on these 30 siparas if you are taking them separately. And then the deduction that is made is that we should not read the Quran unless we have done the ceremonial ablution, which is the wuzu, because the verse which is written is La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun, and this translates it as that only the pure touch it. So if this verse is taken the way it is, just like this in this particular starting and ending, La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun, of course it would imply that only the pure touch it, only the clean touch it, and then this conclusion can easily be drawn that only the people who have done wuzu can touch it. Now, look at the context. This verse is actually a verse of Surah Waqia, the 56th surah of the Quran. And if you study verses which precede and succeed it, you will see that actually the claim is being made by the adversaries of the Quran that the devil has inspired this Quran and evil spirits bring it down from the and on reveal it to the Prophet. This claim is being rebutted by telling us that this is not so. In fact, only the pure touch it. Only the pure angels of the Almighty touch it and bring it down to the Prophet so that he can then disseminate it amongst other people. So clearly you can see here the word La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun. This verse is actually referring to the fact that the Quran has not been inspired by devils or by evil spirits. It is one which is brought down by pure beings. Only the pure touch it. The word mutahharun actually refers to the angels. And the whole idea is that it's not evil spirits who bring it down to the Prophet, it is the pure angels, the beings which are pure absolutely from any sin. They bring it down on the heart of the Prophet, or they reveal it to the Prophet. And if you look at this context, you can clearly see that there's absolutely no discussion or no issue of the fact that you have to read the Quran in the state of wuzu, because this is not even being discussed here. It's not even being alluded here, insinuated here, even in the slightest manner. It's not even touched upon here whether we should read the Quran in the state of wuzu or not. The verse actually says that the mutahharun, only the pure angels of the Almighty, bring it down to the Prophet, as opposed to the evil spirits which the idolaters claimed. So you can see that if you just connect the previous verses with the verse that you have interpreted, you can clearly see that what the Almighty intended was entirely different. He never meant to say that the Quran is to be read with wuzu or not wuzu. So this is something which is not even brought up in the Quran or anywhere else in any correct narrative. And hence the Quran can be, of course, if you are with wuzu, something which is entirely up to you, but it does not mean that you cannot touch the Quran or you cannot read the Quran if you have not done wuzu. And this misconception has simply arisen because this Quranic verse, this particular Quranic verse, La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun, only the pure touch it, has been interpreted out of context, as if the word is being said that, as if the Almighty is implying the fact that only people who are with wuzu should touch it. Let me give you another example, and then, of course, you can ask questions regarding the second segment as well. There is this notion of pan-Islamism which has arisen amongst Muslims, and you would have heard about about Jamaluddin Afghani, a very famous person who in his own lifetime had this dream that all Muslim countries should unite and form a united Islamic state. Even the poet of the East, Allama Iqbal, had this vision that they should become one polity, one caliphate. And one of the areas or one of the verses which is invoked in favor of the fact that Muslims should unite as a single political entity, United Islamic States, you can call them, is a verse which says, Inna hazi ummatukum ummatum wahida, that this ummah of yours is one ummah. Now, if you interpret this verse the way it is, just the way it is, of course, it could mean that it is that the Almighty is implying that the Muslim ummah should be one, because the words are Inna hazihi ummatukum ummatum wahida. This ummah of yours is one ummah, meaning that it should become one ummah. However, if you pick up the Quran and read this verse in the context, you'll find out that this is something which is never being said there at all. And this verse cannot be used by proponents of pan-Islamism to posit the fact that all Islamic states or all Muslim countries should become one and create an united Islamic state. You see, the message of all the prophets of God, or a large number of the prophets of God, has been mentioned prior to this verse. And this is a very common theme of the Quran. The Quran says that the message brought by all the prophets of God has been the same. All the prophets of God have brought the same message of Tawheed, of the hereafter, of accountability, and there has been no change in this message. This is a very common subject of the Quran. And here, in this particular verse, just a couple of verses prior to this verse, what is being discussed is the message of all these prophets. All various prophets of God have been named prior to this verse, and then referring to them, it is said, Inna hazihi ummatukum ummatun wahida. All these prophets are one, meaning the fact that they are one ummah. They have brought the same message. They are singular. You should not discriminate between them. They have this community of prophets is one community. Do not think that they have brought separate messages. Their message has been the same. So you can see that if you interpret this verse in context, it will emerge that the ummatun wahida, inna hazi ummatukum ummatun wahida, one single ummah, is not referring to the Muslim community. It's actually referring to the fact that all the prophets of God have remained as one ummah, or they are one ummah because they have brought the same message. They have communicated the same sharia, or the same bounds of morality, and of course faith, the tenets of faith. So, of course, a number of other examples can be cited, but I would suffice myself here that this is how we have been actually reading the Quran in an atomistic way, by just perhaps deciphering a verse without actually realizing that it has a context. There is a part behind it. There is a part which succeeded, and unless we put the whole verse in the context, we will end up in a grave misconception regarding the interpretation of that verse. So this brings me to an end to this session of our Islam Study Circle. I will now open up the mics. So if you want to ask any questions, please go ahead.
Shehzad, there are two typed up questions. You can look at them under the question section on the control panel that you see.
Okay, so I have actually answered the one which by Farah Naz. Is there another one?
There is two more.
Okay.
From Mateen Tahir side.
So, okay. Do I click at the person's name or what?
You can click on the gray tab that says questions, and it will expand.
Okay, so when I click, I actually get the first question only, which I've already answered.
If you can drag on the divider bar, and you can expand that section.
Okay.
At the bottom, you'll see the double arrow. If you hover over it, and you can expand it, drag it and expand it.
There seems to be some.
I can read it for you, I mean, if you like.
Please just read out the question.
Okay, I'll read the second question first. He says, how can I, as a common man, be able to know the nazm of the Quran?
You see, as far as the nazm of the Quran, nazm is a word for coherence or context of the Quran. This is something which scholars have attempted already, and as a common person, what I would advise is that people who have already discovered this nazm, already given this whole concept deep thought and unraveled this nazm, you should study the work which they have done, the way they divide the Quran into 7 chapters, with each chapter having surahs which are pairs, and then the complementarity of the pairs between each other, and then how a particular surah proceeds by having an introduction and a main body and then a conclusion. So a lot of work has been done in this regard by the Farai school of thought, which I just mentioned earlier on. So if you study the tafsir of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, it is available in Urdu. Many of parts of that Urdu has been translated into English as well. Originally, it was in Arabic, so you can study that. Then you can study the Tadabbur Quran, which is of course available online as well. Parts of it has also been translated into English. Then you can study the Al Bayan of Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi. It's available in Urdu, and parts of it have been translated in English as well. So these are the three proponents of this school of thought who have worked on this, and I would advise you that if you could read through their works, especially the part in which they introduce their work. So, the Dabur Quran has a foreword in which Islahi Sahab has explained his concept of Nazm. Similarly, we have Mizan written by Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi, in which he has written a chapter on how he thinks the Nazm unfold itself. So I would advise you to please go through it, and you can of course compare it to some of the other concepts as well. Imam Razi, Zamakhshari, these are some of the other scholars who have alluded to the Nazm, the way they understand it. So you will be able to compare how the scholars of the Farai school unfold or understand the Nazm, and how you can compare it with some of the earlier authorities.
Um, the other question he has is, he says, we do good and bad deeds, then at a certain point we repent.
I think
Shall,
I've answered this question.
oh, you already
Uh,
have.
yeah, I've already answered this
Okay,
question.
thank you. Thank you. You have a question by Rafiq Khaja Saiba, so you can unmute and
Okay.
answer.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Assalamualaikum. Thank you so much. I'm at the airport, but I thought I have a chance to ask you a question. I wanted to ask you, they say that everything that happens in this world is by Allah's permission, even killing. Now, I don't understand कि Allah की permission के बगैर कुछ नहीं होता. So does this mean Allah की knowledge के बगैर नहीं होता? And what does it mean Allah की permission के बगैर? Even when you kill somebody, it is with Allah's permission. I don't follow this. Can you explain
So,
this to me, please?
what has been written in the Quran is that the events which are going to happen in this world, the Almighty has foreknowledge of those events. It does not mean that He is actually implementing those events or has any role in those events or forcing those events to happen. He has given the free will to people to act according to their own free will. And at times, he does stop people from exercising their free will. For example, if a person has made this intention of killing someone, he might create some hindrance and he would not be able to succeed. Similarly, there can be other examples. But the point that you need to understand is that this is just the foreknowledge of God or pre knowledge of God. He has this all prevailing, all pervasive knowledge in which he knows what will happen. But whatever happens actually happens with our will. So it's like saying that when I'm going to do something, the Almighty has this whole picture in his mind, and he knows that I will get up out of my own free will today, and today I'm going to cross the border and go to another country out of my free will. But whatever I'm going to do out of my free will is in the knowledge of the Almighty. So
But
this foreknowledge
sorry,
is
but it doesn't mean permission. Like someone said, oh, when somebody even murders someone, it is with Allah's permission. I said, Allah doesn't tell you to kill someone.
So that is the wrong perception. It's not that we do something by permission. Actually, what the Quran has mentioned at certain places is that when some evil happens to people, the Almighty at times allows that person to succeed in his evil aims or his evil designs, because of the fact that the Almighty has created this world for trial and test. So He does allow people to work mischief, to do evil things, but that does not mean that He is allowing them, like approving them, that He is approving what they're doing. It's like allowing them to do certain bad things because of the fact that this is one of the ways in which He tries and tests people through various calamities, through various evil designs of people. But that this permission must not be taken in the meaning of approval from the Almighty. It's not an approval. It is just that the Almighty is letting that thing happen because, of course, in His own grand scheme of things, He is testing and trying us.
That's I think the word the person used was wrong. He should have said knowledge instead of saying permission. I think
Right.
if you say he has the knowledge, I understand. But permission, I was quite shocked. Everything
So
is by Allah's
permission,
permission.
permission should not be confused with approval. It's approval. Permission is often construed as if it was an approval from the Almighty. No, permission only here at times there is the word permission is mentioned in the Quran, but that permission is not of the nature of approval. It is of the nature that the Almighty is allowing an evil person to succeed in his evil designs, because this whole scheme of trying and testing mankind, one of the ways is that He does allow people to succeed in their evil design. But that, as I said, is not an approval from Him. It's like He does not stop people from exercising their evil, misuse of evil. They would misuse the freedom of will that they are being blessed by the Almighty.
I understand. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch with you from London, and then I'll follow your programs from there.
So,
Okay, thank you.
and ladies and gentlemen, let me also announce this fact that from next week, inshallah, we'll revert to our previous time. So your Eastern time, 11 a.m. would be the one that we are going to follow. Eastern 11 a.m., Central 12 noon. So that is the time that we will follow. But today, of course, we started 1 hour late because we thought that we would change the time the way it has changed in many parts of the world. But from next week, inshallah, we will revert back to the time, which is, of course, which would in your area translate as 11 a.m. East time, 12 noon as the Central time, Central American time, and that would be 9 p.m. Pakistan time.
Thank you, Shehzad Sahab. Just to let everyone know that the reminders that will be coming out, the automatic reminders, they will be for the 11 Eastern time. So an hour ahead reminder that you get, it will be under the new time. Shehzad Sahab, you have a question from Mushtaq Khan Sahab. Mushtaq Sahab, go ahead.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. My question is about the comment you made about free will. You said Allah can interfere when He wants to. So it appears that my understanding was the free will was free will and there was no interference from Allah.
Well, I never said
That
that.
was absolute. But
I did not say that I think there might be some miscommunication. I did not say that the Almighty interferes. What I meant was that the Almighty has given us this free will, which we exercise. He has foreknowledge of that free will. He already knows how we are going to exercise that free will. So I never said that He interferes in that.
maybe my misunderstanding, but that's the impression I got, that whenever Allah wants, He can block an evil act or something like that.
So that's an entirely different thing. So you see, the Quran says, وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, that at times the Almighty allows people to succeed in their evil design. which means that he does not stop people. For example, if today I have this intention of getting up and making this plan that I'm going to kill such and such a person, so this happens as if the Almighty has permitted that person to exercise his free will because he himself planned that murder. The Almighty allows that person to exercise that free will and continue and achieve whatever motive he had in mind. So that is what I was explaining, how the Almighty lets a person succeed in his evil designs by not actually stopping him. He does not interfere in that free will. But at times he does so. We have so many instances when people were sent to kill another person and that person was not there. We find that people had even gone to try and kill the prophet, but he was not there in his bed. Someone else was lying over there. So at times the Almighty does has his own ways of saving people, of protecting people, and at times he lets the evil that people have intended for another person to go ahead. So that is like the scheme of this whole world is that he, whatever a person does, he does out of his own free will. But at times the Almighty does not allow the free will that we had planned, our own planning, to succeed, whether it is good or bad. So these are two different things. One is the fact that whatever I'm going to do is out of my free will, but whether I'm going to succeed or not is another thing. So I'm going to try to pass my exam, but I may fail because of certain contingencies. Similarly, I'm going to try and do something which I've planned today, but I never get the chance to do that. So you see, you need to understand. What we need to understand is that there is one thing that we have this free will to do what we have intended to do. At times we succeed in implementing the plan that we had in our mind, and at times we don't succeed. Isn't that the case that we come across every day? Many of our plans, they get quashed, and many of our plans, they do succeed.
No, I understand now. I understand what you're saying, that we have the free will,
Right,
but God may have a totally different intention.
right,
So we are planning to do that would not happen.
right.
That part I understand. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So do we have? I think we don't have any more questions as far as I can see. There is no hand which is showing to be raised. So I think we will now end this session because I don't see any more hand. Or do I have Asir Zahir? I think I can Asir Zahur. So please go ahead, Asir.
I have a question, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please, could you speak a little louder?
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, I can.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Uh,
Well,
sir, every surah is a collection of verses, and uh, there is coherence or nazam, as you say, within the verses as well. So, for understanding that nazam or coherence, we need to fully understand or grasp the context. My question is, sir, do we have is there a copy of the Quran existing today,
mhm.
which has the chronological revelation for fully understanding the context of each verse? For example, for somebody like me who doesn't understand the nazm or coherence. So
So you see,
is there a
mhm, I do understand what you're asking. So you see,
is there a
the Quran was
chronological
given. We don't have any chronological collection of the verses the way they were revealed, and
right?
also let me tell you that it is actually not needed as well, because you see, the Quran was given an entirely new arrangement right at the end when all of it was revealed or had been
Right.
revealed and had been completed. the Quran was given an entirely new arrangement because it was to be transmitted to the next generations, and uh, this new sequence was given in deference to the fact that the rest of the generations are going to benefit from it, and hence this was a claim that the context shall now be understood from within the Quran. So we don't need to go outside the Quran to find out the circumstances which occasioned the revelation of a verse, simply because if you go deeper into the text of the Quran, you'll find out that the context itself is within a surah. So if you would like to know what was the reason that the surah was revealed, or what it deals with, or what are the areas in which it gives us guidance, it is something which is found within the surah. So that is why scholars of the Farai school make this one of the tenets of their principles of coherence, that if you have to understand the coherence of a surah, the context or the nazm of the surah, then it is to be from within the surah. The surah itself will reveal itself to you when you study it deeply. And as I said, if I would advise you to look up some of the work which has been already done in this regard, and you'll find out that the way it has been done, it lets us know, it reveals itself that if we have to understand the occasion of a surah, the context of the surah, then we do not need any external agency or any external chronological sequence. It is from within the surah. Why? Because had the Quran been arranged in the chronological sequence, then that would have been important, what you were saying. But since that sequence was abandoned and a new sequence was given, the purpose was that new sequence should be the final sequence, and the context should then be gathered from within that sequence and not outside of it.
Uh, Thank you very much, sir. Actually, the reason why I'm asking this is because I did study just a bit of a work that was done by the Farhai school. Uh, Actually, sir, there are so many differences. For example, the basic ayat which everybody quotes is "Walaga datainaka sab'an minal masani." We've
Mm-hmm.
often given you the seven oft repeated verses, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are scholars of the Quran uh,
Mm-hmm.
which say that this has nothing to do with the coherence or nazm
Right.
given by the Almighty. This is purely relating to the Surah Fatiha.
Right.
So how do I
You see, this is
reconcile?
something which has been dealt with all of we have actually gone in detail while comparing this verse with other interpretations, and we have shown that Surah Fatiha has 6 verses. It does not even have 7 verses,
Right,
and
right,
so therefore, this is something which in itself is needs some revision. The word "walaqad atainaka sab'am il masani," the word masani does not mean repetitive.
right,
No lughat, no lexicon, no dictionary gives this meaning. Masani is the plural of masna, and masna means
right,
something which occurs in pairs. So you see, the
right,
best way to understand such verses is that you give a comparative study, you study the reasoning of both
mhm,
sides, and then make a decision yourself. This is not
right,
just the case with this particular verse. We have difference of opinions in so many other verses of the Quran,
right,
and the
right,
only way to resolve this difference is to study the reasoning behind the differences which various scholars have offered, and you'll begin
right,
to see the light yourself. And let me tell you that this is what we call the academic approach, and this is something which is the case with every discipline of knowledge. If you study science,
right,
you'll find two conflicting theories, perhaps regarding the same phenomena. What you do
mhm,
is that you test one theory, and you find it to be correct, and you abandon the other one. In a very similar
right,
way, you study various translations and explanations of a verse, and make up your mind yourself. And you don't need to be a scholar yourself to make up your mind, because you
right,
can, of course, compare two explanations and see which makes more sense. So
right,
don't get disheartened by the fact if there are differences
mhm,
of opinion, because there are differences of opinion, and as this is not the case with just one verse, it's the case with the whole of the Quran. So a true
right,
student of the Quran, what he needs to do or she needs to do is just keep studying, and wherever he or she finds these conflicting opinions, or he should study the reasoning, the arguments proffered by the various authorities, and then make up your own mind.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Most welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are now finished and we have no more questions. So, with this reminder that inshallah next time we'll meet an hour earlier, which would be 11 a.m. Eastern Time and 12 noon Central Time, which is 9 p.m. Pakistan time. And have a good week. Enjoy yourselves, inshallah, and we shall meet again at 9 p.m. Pakistan time, Saturday, inshallah, next week. Khuda Hafiz.
Yes.